I'm going to talk about what we had. I'm going to talk about what the public thought and what the public still think and why it's still a battle for us. What we had in policing in relation to cybercrime when I became the National Policing Lead was we had a very tactical unit called the PECU, the Police E-Crime Unit in the Metropolitan Police Service, which I have to say were brilliant at working with banks and other partners to identify cyber criminals who are either active in the UK or who are affecting the UK and bringing them to justice. Absolutely brilliant, but very tactical and focused operationally very much on London and very much on the banking sector. Across the rest of the country, there was absolutely nothing. And I have to say, the only reason the Met had that was because of the brilliant leadership of Janet Williams, my predecessor, who persuaded the Commissioner it was a good thing to do in the Met. There was that. And there was a very small capability in what was then the Serious and Organised Crime Agency and now is the National Crime Agency, who were very strategic in nature, who tended to paint very broad pictures, very useful, very helpful pictures, but did very little to mitigate the harm that we saw from cybercrime, both from abroad and in the UK. So that's the capability we have. And the other thing we had is we had a public, and I'm talking about individuals, businesses, whether they're based small, medium or large business, who are extremely cynical about the ability of law enforcement to have any part in the landscape whatsoever. And as a consequence of that, we had very little reporting of cybercrime, either as individuals or as businesses. And still to this day, that's an issue for us, but it's something which is improving year on year, month on month, week on week. So we had a pretty poor situation. And we also had a team of 43 Chief Constables, of which I'm one. There are 43 of us, independent Chief Constables, who frankly thought burglary dwelling, criminal damage, violent crime, child sexual exploitation were far more important than cyber. And all of those things are very, very important. But actually, I know and you know that the biggest area of growing crime, the two biggest areas are online fraud and cybercrime. They're the two biggest areas of growing crime that we're seeing in the UK. It's in the Crime Survey of England and Wales. It's everybody's experience that that's what's happening. And when I speak to less august audiences than this, when I speak to very much practitioners or the members of the public, I do a bit of a show of hands normally about who's been a victim of normal, traditional, acquisitive crime and who's been a victim of cybercrime. And it's always overwhelmingly many, many more people have been victims of new cyber-enabled or cyber-dependent crime compared to traditional crime. And that leads me to pose the question to my Chief Constable colleagues: why do we predicate policing on dealing with traditional physical volume crime and ignore the new crimes which are taking over the world of criminality and victimology? And that's the debate we've been having over the last 6 years. So that was what I inherited. Fast forward 6 years, we now have the fantastic NCSC, and I don't need to say any more about that because Peter's covered it. We now have the National Cybercrime Unit in the National Crime Agency, who, in terms of international cooperation, in terms of their capacity to go after cyber criminals both here and abroad, and in terms of their ability to bring leadership, operational leadership to cybercrime in the UK, have completely changed the situation over their predecessors. And we work with them closely. In fact, once every couple of months, we call it Team Cyber UK. And it sounds a bit cliched, doesn't it? But it's not. The senior leadership from all the agencies I'm talking about meet once every 2 months, and we plan together, we strategize together, we make sure that we have a strategic direction collectively that means we can be effective for the future. And that Team Cyber UK led to, when we had the WannaCry incident, the attack on the NHS, the whole system worked together in a way that's never worked before. Regional Organised Crime Units, the National Crime Agency, NCSC, local policing, we all work together effectively to mitigate harm, to collect evidence, collect intelligence, and to make sure we got the NHS back up and running as quickly as we could. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal what took place. So with the NCCU, we have the Regional Organised Crime Units. I was responsible for the Regional Organised Crime Units for 7 years until very recently, and within that we've built the Regional Cybercrime Units. That is a team of 70 now experienced investigators in every across the whole of the country in all the 9 regions of England and Wales, and colleagues are here from Scotland and they are part of it as well, and Northern Ireland. But they are experienced, capable individuals who can do network investigation. They are competent cyber investigators. They are competent at collecting intelligence, competent at turning that into evidence, competent at presenting it at court. But alongside them, we have teams of protect officers whose job it is to help protect you and protect individuals in each of those regions. And we have prevent officers whose job it is to prevent people who are at risk of becoming cyber criminals taking that particular route, particularly some of the things that we've picked up through some of the analysis that has been done within the Home Office. And they are great, and they work collectively together. For the first time in policing outside of counter-terrorism, I got Chief Constables to agree that I and the head of the National Cybercrime Unit on a monthly basis could task all of those assets against the highest, most prevalent threats in the UK, or the most serious offenders in the UK. And we do, on a monthly basis, task those units in that way, in a way that chiefs would never do in any other area. They're all their units that they'll control. They let me have access to their units, and we direct and control them operationally through national tasking. First time that's ever happened outside of terrorism. But the big gap that we had was at the local level. And I go back to what I said at the start, that if you phoned what is now Action Fraud, or phoned your local police and got put through to Action Fraud, you would get a very sympathetic response from Action Fraud traditionally. Then you would get nothing from local policing, frankly, because we didn't have the competence, the capacity or the capability to do anything about anything really at a local level. The last year has seen, after much heartache and difficulty, has seen us persuade every Chief Constable in the country that now is the time to create their own local cybercrime unit, with help from the Home Office and Cabinet Office in terms of seed funding. And I'm pleased to say now that in the East Midlands, which was the area that went first, we have a local cybercrime unit in every force. There was already one in Derbyshire, but there would be, wouldn't there? But there is now one in every force in Derbyshire. And we've looked at the first 6 months. And what we aimed to do was make sure that everybody, individual or business, who reported cybercrime through Action Fraud would receive an investigation, a response, victim care, effective prevent advice. The analysis we've done over the first 6 months in the East Midlands is almost 100%, 96+% of all victims who have reported cybercrime have received an appropriate response, have received an investigation into the criminality, which may not have led to a criminal justice outcome, but many of them have. They've received prevent advice, and they've received appropriate victim care, and their experience and their satisfaction is through the roof. Compare that to 6 years ago, when if you did phone the police or contacted Action Fraud, you would get absolutely nothing. So we thought that was kind of the last piece in the jigsaw in terms of actually building capability, and we've done that. And we couldn't be more pleased with what's happening. The East Midlands has gone, the West Midlands has gone, Yorkshire's gone, North West has gone. By April the 1st next year, every single force in the country, all 43 forces in England and Wales, will have that local cybercrime capability with that performance framework that they will provide that appropriate level of victim care. So what now? The task for us now is to make sure that we understand our position in the landscape, because one of the concerns we have is we are a bit reactive. We're not as proactive as we'd like to be. And also in policing, we don't think we are I don't think as a police leader we are a sufficiently entrepreneurial set of people to really keep up to pace with the way the world is changing. So the test for us now is to try and build intelligence capability within every region, supported by the NCCU and the NCSC, working with industry in every region, working with academia in every region, to understand how the picture is changing and to develop our capabilities to make sure we keep up to speed. Because at the moment, our industry engagement is brilliant at a national level, it's pretty poor at a regional and local level. So the challenge for us in the next year is to start to build that intelligence capacity, and the only way we do that is by working with colleagues in industry and academia. I've gone on long enough. I do apologise. That's what we've done in law enforcement. Thank you.
It proves my point. For years I've been saying to somebody, oh, so you got the job because you were on holiday at the time, and I've actually met somebody now that did. Our second speaker is Helen Evans. She leads the Home Office policy team responsible for the UK's response to cybercrime, which includes oversight of the relevant strategy and legislation. And she also manages a huge investment programme in law enforcement.
So the overall aim of the Serious and Organised Crime Strategy, which the government published on the 1st of November, I thought they should have done it on Halloween, but apparently we didn't get a grid slot. The overall aim is to protect our citizens, leaving no safe space for serious and organised criminals to operate. And importantly, right at the end of that sentence, you'll see that is online and offline. And Peter's quite right that it's been a big journey over the last few years to make the online part of that something that we can deliver. The SOC strategy that we've just published, sorry, SOC is a very lazy shorthand for serious and organised crime, as you probably all know, is about how we go on to do that even better in the future. Moving on to the next slide, please. Serious and organised crime is a really broad and diverse set of threats. Some of them are threats to business, some of them are threats to individuals, some of them are old-fashioned real-world crimes where there are harms to the person, and some of them are very new and developing crimes where it's all about the online threat, and quite a few where actually they're coming in between. So we're hearing more now about the cyber role in domestic abuse, for example. So these are not separate threats, as this is a beautiful diagram that shows them all are separate, but they're not separate, they all overlap. And as we know, the internet generally, but also computer misuse and hacking enables a whole load of other crimes that we worry about very much. Overall, serious and organised crime costs the UK at least £37 billion a year. That's a big underestimate. We know that we're not catching everything in that figure. We certainly know we're not catching all the costs of cybercrime, because even after you count all the losses to business directly and to individuals directly from cybercrime, you've then got to try and come up with something to estimate the cost of all the protective measures that people put in place and the cost of all the lost business. And that's quite hard to do. We keep trying, and we're getting closer to a real persuasive figure, but I'm not going to offer one today because somebody will have a better one. But it's a lot. There's a figure up there to show the number of businesses that are identifying at least one cybersecurity breach or attack. I suspect that is probably less than is happening, because those are the ones that get identified. So, the seriousness of the cyber piece of serious and organised crime sort of definitely is not lost on the Home Office. Can I have the next slide? So, Peter has already said quite a lot about how we've built the system to respond to cybercrime, and the way that law enforcement collaborates with each other, with government and with the NCSC. I wanted to just say a little bit about the sort of strategic framework for the response to serious and organised crime and what that means for cyber, but I'll be touching on some of the pieces of capability and the units that Peter's already spoken about. So going from kind of left to right here, and this is quite a complicated diagram, but it's a lot less complicated than the first drafts that I saw. So you can be glad that we went through a few iterations and took out some of the boxes that came across multiple arrows for clarity's sake. But so the first tranche there, and I think it's something that I want to make a key point about here. There is a huge amount of collaboration across the system, and I often find myself trying to explain what it is that the Home Office does or what it is that law enforcement does that's different to anybody else in the system. Law enforcement works across all of this strategy, but the absolute key piece that only law enforcement can do is bringing people who've broken the law to justice. And so that part is always going to be a key part of what we invest in law enforcement to do. And the specialist units, as Peter said, at the national and regional level, do need that backup at the local level. Pete spoke about having persuaded his fellow chief constables. There are 42 of them, but I had to persuade the Treasury, so I feel like between us we probably had kind of different challenges, but both quite challenging. And I feel incredibly proud to be part of that really quite revolutionary change in the way that we police serious and organised crime, the cyber part of serious and organised crime in the UK. In a way, that is a very traditional law enforcement role, though, and although against a very modern crime type, the left-hand side of this, the right-hand side of these arrows gets more into the newer areas of the strategy, and those where we're actually concluding that we need to invest more time and energy as a system. You might be familiar with this 4P framework from the previous strategy and from the work of counterterrorism. So protect and prepare, I think, in cyber is a particularly important area. We know that we can do a lot to, of course, this, you know as an audience more than anybody else, how much the sort of the cyber security of the country, collectively and individually, depends on having the right defences in place. And we and law enforcement work with NCSC to try to make sure that we're giving the right advice about how people can do that. And in the Home Office in particular, we have an interest, we have the lead on trying to help members of the public make the right decisions about how the secure behaviours that they adopt. And we know that a lot of people don't necessarily understand the risk that they face as an individual online. We also know that even when people do understand it, they don't necessarily rate it as particularly important as against other goals that they have personally, like I'd really like to be able to shop online really fast and I don't care about the risk to me as an individual. It has to be said that they tend to care quite a lot more once they get burnt, but we have to balance, I think, quite carefully the messages that we give to make sure that people are taking decisions without kind of being so scared that they don't shop online at all, or don't bank online, or don't use the wide variety of things that the internet should be enabling us as a society to do good things with. So we have our Cyber Aware campaign, which is part of a joined-up government effort to make sure, as I say, that people know how to keep themselves safe online. Finally, moving right across to the prevent strand about stopping the problem at source. This is probably the most developmental, experimental, I might even say, area of the work that we do on cybercrime. I think it's absolutely right that we do it. I think we are still at the early stages of understanding what works, and I'm really interested to talk to people about what they think does work. And this is basically trying to make sure that we can actually reduce the number of people who get drawn into cyber offending in the first place. So clearly, making sure that when people do offend, that they feel the force of the law and end up convicted, charged and convicted, and ideally sentenced for the crimes that they've committed. That's a big part of deterring people. But wouldn't it be great if we could deter them before they got to that point? Particularly, I think there's a big opportunity here with young people to make sure that people understand what the law says and what is legal and what isn't legal, and that they understand that there will be consequences if they offend. And that's an area of work that we're getting into increasingly through the Prevent Network in the regions and also the work of the National Crime Agency. And finally, and I want to say a bit more about this, the really new piece of this strategy compared to the last one is the emphasis that it places on a whole system approach. And I think in cyber and with you as an audience, that's particularly important, because what this is about acknowledging that actually there are no bits of the system that can single-handedly deliver the results that we want to see. I've got a role, and it is, as Martin said, about overseeing the strategy, about making sure that I can fund whatever brilliant scheme Peter comes up with for what law enforcement need, and it's about making sure that the legislation sets the right standards, the right framework, and gives law enforcement the right powers for going after the bad guys. But that absolutely isn't going to solve the problem, and the role of the CISO, I never quite know how to pronounce it. I'll take a straw poll round a workshop tomorrow. However you pronounce it, that you as a community, the information you have and the reporting of that into to the NCSC and into law enforcement where crimes have been committed, that's all vital to help law enforcement do their job. And I think that what I'm really interested to hear more about, I guess, from people this evening and as we go through workshops together tomorrow, is what do you think is working well, and what could we do better? Are there pieces of legislation which aren't giving you the protection that you need as industry? Are there pieces of legislation which are constraining you too much from putting in place the right measures? And what would it take to achieve a massive increase in reporting of information and intelligence? I mean, I think this is an issue that we face across all crime types. So it's not a problem only of the cyber community, but I'm very interested particularly to hear what people are feeling sort of post GDPR and what impact that's had on both mandatory and voluntary sharing. But I'll stop there, I think. I've got a whole load of other questions, but we'll have lots of time to talk about them over the next couple of days, and I'm really pleased to be here.
He's got the grand title of CISO and Director of Information for the City London Police, the City London Corporation, and Action Fraud. Also the chair of the National Police Information Assurance Group, which draws together all of the police information assurance issues, and your view, sir.
Thank you. I'm sitting here wondering whether I've got the easiest gig or the hardest. And my thanks, my predecessors, because they've set the scene on all the things I was going to talk about. That's perfect. But I think really it's a little bit of a tale from the riverbank, really, in respect of Action Fraud, the work that's going on there, the outputs that are being generated from that, the future state, what we're looking at. We are always peering into the murky crystal ball to see what's coming next. And if I look around the room and the people I've spoken with already this evening, we're all doing that, aren't we? Because we're all trying to be sighted on what's coming next. But I think, a bit of potted history. The Action Fraud system has been operating now for over 10 years. I normally, when I come and present and say the word Action Fraud, there's a plethora of rotten fruit that is thrown in my direction. But before you fling, I should just step in, and as Pete's already alluded to, we knew things had to improve. Yeah, things have improved. Things have got better. Things not only have got better across the strategic approach across policing nationally, but also with the technology base as well. And we've just literally in the last 3 weeks gone live with a completely new technical refresh on the platform, much more interrogative and supporting of victims in an automated way, more powerful engines that are analysing the data and providing network data to allow our colleagues across the country and internationally to actually catch the bad guys. Now, if Ian was sitting here, my boss, he would say that we cannot arrest ourselves out of this. And I think that's very true. It's not a problem that the police are going to be able to solve by arresting it, entirely. And I think, and certainly the numbers that I'll come on to that we're seeing, it is like pointing a fire hose at a teacup. So, let's put that out there. That's very true. But there are things we can do. There are things we are doing, and we are having a positive impact, and we are influencing change. And that's important. And I think there's been a certain degree of dissent, perhaps, or murmurings. I often hear, well, we tell Action Fraud something, and we don't hear anything else. And I think that's very true. And I think and that is a fault, and that was a fault, and we accept that. That's been rectified. Things have got a lot better. You will always get a response. Victims are being supported. They are getting the relevant support. The right people are being given the right information. Things are happening. Some volumes to give you some idea of what happens and what's going on. At the moment, in excess of 25,000 reports a month are coming into the Action Fraud Centre. Of those, between 12 to 15,000 are disseminated. There is a criteria, of course, so if there is a lead, something we can do something with, a name, an address, a telephone number, a bank account, that is packaged, that is sent out. If we can catch someone, if there's something, then that will be forwarded on to the relevant force for that investigation. So that is happening. And so, of that, there are still percentages where we can't do anything with them, and that's where the frustration points are, and I fully accept that. But I think what I would also say to you is there is the greater good in this. Okay, so I appreciate no one wants to be the victim of crime, but when you are, telling us can make a difference. We may not be able to get you your £100, £10,000 back, but the information you provided with us, connected with other network information that we've gathered from industry, from other victims, actually helps us build that picture, which helps us put the right tools into the hands of the right people to actually get the bad guys. So I keep reporting. That's the easy gig. Keep reporting. Please keep telling us. And equally, we want to know how we can improve. And my experience has been people know are not shy in coming forward and telling me that. So I look forward to hearing everyone's wonderful ideas over the next couple of days around that. Just some of the kind of themes that we're looking at, just by way of interest, I think, across the group. We are seeing, of course, the hacking of servers continues. We've heard about hostile states, yes, but actually organised crime, it's follow the money, malware, and of course, prevalent across all is social engineering. And I think whatever the guise takes for channel, we're seeing lots and lots and lots of that clearly coming through and being worked. My personal favourites, obviously DDoS, that's never going to go away, but sextortion, another great one to add to my dictionary, and I personally received one of these, I love it. So they really are checking their email addresses before they're hitting me, but that's great. This is where they're ransoming you for money in the event of they've got you on video watching pornography. That's wonderful. I have time for that in my working life. Again, it's going on, it's building.
You don't do it at work. Okay.
Well, what you do in the privacy of your own home.
Sorry.
I should have checked the address, Martin. Yes. But, yes, indeed. But again, we're also seeing cover stories, aren't we? In so much as that we are seeing hostile states guise as organised crime groups. The likes of Fancy Bear and Lizard Squad being things that are going through. And of course, we're passing that intelligence through to our colleagues at NCSE and the NCA for further investigation. The aspects as well, I drive you all towards as well as our alerting service within that. So we will tell you about things that are happening in real time as quickly as we can to give you the tools to let you know what's coming and what's happening. So, we run services where you can send us all the phishing emails you get. I don't know if you're aware of that. You can send them all to us. We'll happily take them. Hooray. And we will, not on my server, but we'll put it at another one, and then and we share that again with the right people. What we do is share. That is what we're about. We're about taking information in, analysing that information, and giving it to the right people. If we're not talking to us, we can't analyse it. We can't, so we need people to help us and bring it in. I'll give you a little anecdote because I like to try and cheer it up a bit. So we get these phishing reports come through. One that sticks in my mind that I will dine out on for a little while is the case of African nation sponsoring an individual onto the ISIS, the space station. Okay, so the email comes through to you and it says, "Hello, I'm on the ISIS space station. My country have got me up here having a great time. It's wonderful. However, they haven't got enough money to get me back." If you could click the crowdfunding source below, you know the rest. So it goes on, and there's and we take that and we share that and we move it forward. Another thing we are looking to do, and we're delivering now quite strongly in the city, we have a brand called Griffin, which we've used for counter-terrorism purposes very effectively, which is exported now internationally to help counter terrorism. Okay. Terrorism. And we've now shifted that into Cyber Griffin, and we are now engaging directly. If you have a premises you do business in the city, we will support you in providing you with exercising and baseline briefings, as well as advisory groups around cyber and how you can best defend against a number of those issues and threats that are coming in. So again, trying to touch the tech, get people out there, press the flesh, and actually do a lot of support around that as well. And that will as well be sharing best practice as it builds in a more wider audience. I'm just going to close on one thing, if I may, and this is where I have to dive into my pocket, actually, so excuse me when I do this. And that really is about the event that we've got here and the opportunity that I think Martin's obviously has put together for all our benefit, really, in taking us forward. And I'm just going to bring this up. Now, I get quite a lot of messaging on LinkedIn, as I'm sure you can appreciate. But I just want to share something with you, okay, that I think is quite important, and there's a lesson here. It says, "Hi Gary," nice start. "I thought I'd take the opportunity to share our recent case study with you. The managing partner took decisive action and selected product name, okay. He has now eliminated cyber threats from inside and outside his corporate environment. It's not over yet, and is compliant with GDPR privacy requirements. If you'd like to know more, then please feel free to contact me." P.S. It also gets rid of bird poo on your car as well. It's amazing, I honestly think we've moved ahead of snake oil salesmen, and I think the next couple of days is a great opportunity for vendors to dispel those myths and actually demonstrate products that are going to help us defend, appropriately. So I'll close on that, if I may. Thank you.
No, we'll have you taken off our database.
I thought you might. Thank you.
worth a try. Nick is the CIO for all UK military operations. That's a hell of a title, isn't it? And fascinatingly, and I need to know more about this, he pivots from counter-terrorism to state-based competition. And I think that's fighting on two fronts if ever I heard of it.
Thank you, Martin. For those of you who are looking at the elegant white chairs with some envy at this point, let me just assure you that those of us in the white chairs are looking at the blue chairs with some envy ourselves. So I'm going to stand if that's okay. So what am I doing up here? Well, just as defence and law enforcement have to deal with counter-terrorism, just from different angles, then cybersecurity is one of those other things that cross over both areas. And just as some states see terrorist organisations as useful proxies, they can also see organised crime in the same way, in particular if they're looking either for plausible deniability or indeed to kind of just raise revenue. You're all very well aware of the range of threat actors in cyberspace, of course, and at the kind of the top end where you've got terrorist organised crime and states themselves, criminality features across the whole of that range, including that top end, but it's particularly troubling if it's perpetrated by states because of the resources that they've got available to them and the degree of protection that they can afford to the perpetrators themselves. And in case you've been distracted by the fight against counter-terrorism in recent years, most publicly, obviously, against Islamic State, but others as well, let me point out that in the same period, we've really transitioned to a multipolar world, one of constant competition between states, and that competition is most fierce between, obviously, the USA and China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And anybody who looks at the news can figure that out for themselves. Now, some of these states are more willing than others to resort to crime in the conduct of that competition, and all states are good at creating insider threats, whether that's through social engineering, persuasion, bribery, coercion, blackmail. This is the sort of stuff that kind of states do in the shadows. China. Well, China's played a long game, isn't it? It knows that if it sustains high levels of economic growth, it eventually is going to overmatch the USA in all spheres of activity, and that includes hard military power because that comes from a strong economic base. And to maintain or accelerate that growth, it's routinely been accused of intellectual property theft, including via cyber espionage. And indeed, some commentators have accused it of the penetration of managed service providers to facilitate that theft. Turning to Russia, Russia's different. It's close to the peak of its power now because there's a demographic challenge that it's facing. And so almost inevitably there is a longer-term decline coming. So the West and Russia constantly talk past each other. And Russia feels the need really to assert itself now to secure that long-term influence. And asserting itself is often deliberately disruptive, including via cyber sabotage, to either level the playing field with competitors or simply to act as a warning to other states not to ignore it. And the UK government has recently outed the GRU's activities in this regard, and again, Peter touched on this at the beginning. Turning to the Arabian Gulf, there's strong ethnic and religious divides there, providing a complex backdrop to what is essentially a competition between Iran and Saudi Arabia to be the regional hegemon. The USA is clearly a powerful external actor in that region, and Iran sees cyber potentially as an opportunity to level that playing field. And then finally, North Korea, well, that's obviously the subject of economic sanctions, but it faces such high levels of economic stress that cybercrime must surely present a very attractive opportunity to generate revenue. And unsurprisingly, North Korean actors have been associated with ransomware attacks such as WannaCry. So what does that mean for you? Because this all stuff all sounds very scary. Well, first, actually, to be honest, if your company operates in the region of one of these states, then you should be prepared for some kind of collateral damage at some point, particularly when that state feels threatened, or the need to message other states, but below the threshold of armed conflict. So think about your patching and disaster recovery arrangements. But don't panic too much because, of course, states are not going to use their best cyber exploits against you. They're going to save those for using against other states. So it's more about collateral damage in that sense. And if you're wondering if the UK is in the vicinity of Russia, for example, think about the use of Novichok nerve agent in Salisbury. And that will probably give you an idea as to whose region you think you might be in. Second, if you've got proprietary knowledge in your company, and that's the backbone of your profitability. And let's face it, without that, to be honest, you're competing on very thin margins on the basis of a very low cost base. then really you probably ought to be thinking about putting that at the heart of your cybersecurity agenda. Think about insider threats, think about perhaps focusing on your behavioural analytics, on your people and third-party suppliers around those kind of crown jewels of your proprietary knowledge, the thing that differentiates you from your competition. And then thirdly, don't forget, of course, that raising revenue in terms of cybercrime, it often requires your systems to operate as designed, simply paying out product, services or payment to the wrong recipient. And so in that instance, whether it's ransomware, sophisticated social engineering, spear phishing, those sorts of things, are likely to kind of feature. And then within that, think more broadly than just your company, because many individuals in your company will, of course, be using the same passwords at home as they use in the company. When they're traveling, they'll be very visible in terms of personal devices. You might want to think about the use of VPNs, for example, on both the personal devices and work devices when they're traveling overseas. But broadly speaking, if you're a competent professional, then probably you're better positioned than you think you are against the scary stuff. And that's me.
Well, I think we have to agree that was a tour de force of the whole landscape. I am so grateful to you all. Thank you so much, one, for being here, and two, for contributing so openly, so honestly, and so comprehensively. We have some time if anybody has any questions. And if we could, in traditional SASIC fashion, say who you are and follow it up with your question. Do we have a microphone at all? Did we have an idea for the scooting? Oh, if we could do this gentleman on the front first, who is called Mr. David Cripps. If you could say who you are, sir.
Thank you, David Cripps. There's a lot of really good initiatives that are coming from the stage, but I appreciate that you are budget strapped as everyone. What are the plans, or are there any plans to engage with us off the stage in sort of a cyber volunteer basis? I'm aware of Industry 100, but that takes quite a lot of commitment from industry. So what about the smaller firms who may have expertise, who are perfectly happy to volunteer?
Can I take that first, if I may, from a policing perspective? We have a scheme called Cyber Specials, Cyber Volunteers. I hosted one of their first collective meetings together in Derbyshire about 4 weeks ago at the weekend. Brilliant individuals from the security sector and the cyber security sector and information security sector who are volunteering to work alongside us. I think we have 70 cyber specials at the moment in various different forces. I have some in Derbyshire, there are some in the NCA, and there are some in other forces, a lot around Gloucester, funnily enough. And we haven't yet quite understood how we're going to harness the power of them, because they are helping local individual units develop capability, and it goes back to the issue I raised earlier about academia and industry helping us to mature in a way that we're probably not great at ourselves. But actually I think there's a bit more they can do. There's something about them acting collectively as a task force and enhancing our thinking and enhancing our strategy and actually helping us respond more effectively to incidents. So it's something we're on in policing. There is a bid with the Home Office to support it, which I'm sure Helen's going to say yes to, but I'm not going to preempt that. But we are thinking heavily about it. There's a guy called Tom Hay. Do you know Tom Hay at all? Tom Hay, who is a very senior volunteer in policing, who has a cybersecurity background, is leading on that with myself and Richard Berry.
So how do we engage with you on that? We may have some in the audience, or it's something that they could go back and champion within their own teams. How do we harness that today?
Right, there are several different ways. Firstly, grab me by the collar during the course of the next 2 days if you do want to volunteer. And
that's not a sentence you'll hear often from a Chief Constable.
No, as long as you're carrying a pint, it's fine. But no, seriously, just grab hold of me over the next couple of days, give me your business card and tell me you want to volunteer, and I'll put you in touch with the appropriate person locally to where you live or where you work, if you so wish. or you can actually go on, I think it's not, what is it on the website it's on? It's on the NCA website, National Crime Agency website, which talks about volunteering there as well. But also, if you go to your local force website, you'll see the opportunity to volunteer for cyber specialists and cyber volunteers. Can I say, we want as many as possible. The more we have, the harder it is for us to cope with it, but the better the outcome, and that's fine by us.
Was there somebody else on the panel that moved?
She wants to say yes to the money.
No,
No,
just
no,
leave
but
leave it for an hour or so, Peter, then follow up over a beer.
In support of the initiative, and it's something that ministers take very seriously. And I think it was in not the last manifesto. So many elections recently, but in the previous government's manifesto, and something that I know current ministers are very, very interested in supporting. So yeah, absolutely, just echo those points from Peter.
So volunteers, hands up. There you go. There's one. And there was another question on the front row, I believe. And you are, sir?
Thank you. It's Steve Johnson from Orion Health. To your point, PTAB, I think we all recognise here that we all have a part to play in making things as difficult and uneconomic as possible for threat actors to actually take action and to make profit out of these things. So thank you for that. My question is, inevitably that is going wrong in places, hence the increase in cybercrime. But cybercrime doesn't recognise geographical borders, and we do have that constant constraint of judicial reach. There are things that are improving in that area, and I'm wondering if you could just reflect some of the improvements that are being made about working with our colleagues in Europe and further afield when we do need to try and bring some people to justice.
I think the point that is true across a number of crime types, of course, not just cyber crime. The impact of Brexit on law enforcement will be very significant, and we know that some of the European instruments that are important for all crime are particularly important for cybercrime because of the boundary issue that you mentioned. I mean, things like the European arrest warrant and the other forms of cooperation through Europol. A no-deal Brexit is going to be, in this as in other areas, if that's where we end up, and the government continues to believe that is not the most likely outcome, but that it is a risk that we need to plan for, if that is where we end up, then it will be a very significant issue. And the government, not only a couple of days ago, I think, announced that the Metropolitan Police would have a focused unit to look at planning for no deal for all of law enforcement. And I don't know more about it than that because I read that in the paper. But I think that's a really important step, because if we are in no deal territory, then it will be a case of making everything work through the excellent relationships that law enforcement have with European partners, but it will take longer for each contact that is made, because it will be a case of kind of reinventing the rule book. I think with a deal, it may well be that we could preserve some of those instruments, and that's certainly they're very high priority on the list of things that the Home Office and government as a whole is arguing for, and that's been the case right along. But yeah, it's the no deal feature that we worry about, I think, and so fingers crossed still for a deal, I suppose. I think that's the government's line. We're not just crossing our fingers, we're working towards it as well. Or my colleagues are. Do you want to add to that at all, Peter?
I don't know, because I'm in danger of getting political about Brexit, aren't I? So I'll be really careful about it. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, as a young detective, and I've spent most of my career as a detective, we talked about the relationship between the victim, offender and location. If you got that right and that triangle, then as a detective you're going to be successful. That's been blown out the water by the digital world and by cybercrime, where there can be no relationship between the victim, offender and location. And so, in some ways, I think it's a more fundamental question you ask, because actually I think the digital world and the digitisation of victimology and criminology, I think it shakes policing to its very roots in terms of how we're structured for the future. Because actually we are 43 fiefdoms in England and Wales, plus Scotland, plus Northern Ireland, which are independent fiefdoms that are governed and led in a way which is counter-collaborative, really, frankly. and we have to overcome lots of that at the moment. And my view is for the future, there will come a tipping point where we have to reconsider the whole structure of policing in the UK and beyond if we're going to cope effectively with the new threats that we face. Really big issue for us, but it's coming quicker than most people think, I think.
You can't act on evidence. Sometimes you can act on intelligence. And so just as the police forces need to act in a kind of federated way, the cross-Whitehall aspects to cybersecurity are critical. There are people beyond law enforcement who have activities in this space. And so the kind of cross-Whitehall aspects are probably the key in answering your question in what do you do beyond the bits where law can reach.
Just as well, just to add a bit of silver lining. We are already working internationally. Policing does work internationally. Just to put, we don't just keep it in the UK. And we, as I'm sure other forces are, but we have people now in New York, for example, as part of the DA's department. There's a lot of transactional work going on there, and other centres where we know there is cybercrime, and we can disrupt at a local level, working with the local law enforcement. So whilst we cannot directly go out there and do, but we are channeling and working collaboratively with local resources, and that is having an impact. So just to provide a little bit of a...
just to add to the positivity, although not to detract from the serious concern. I think I should have mentioned in my comments earlier. Of course, EU cooperation is absolutely key, as I said, across many different crime types and not just cyber. But actually, our main instrument for specifically cybercrime cooperation, the Budapest Convention, is not tied to EU structures, and our membership and cooperation with fellow Budapest Convention signatories won't change on Brexit at all. Budapest, I think, as well, is an example, and the other work that's done around international cybercrime cooperation, of how we can build dialogue and cooperation and effective cooperation with countries outside the EU, and I think those sorts of approaches will work with our current EU fellow member states post-Brexit. It's only that it will take time to kind of redefine how that's going to work. But there are structures and models out there that we can follow. So it's not impossible by any means.
And I think we have time for one more question. Gentleman here, you are, sir?
Brigadier Nick Baker, UK MOD. I work with Nick Lloyd, or have just been working with Nick Lloyd for the last 2 years, has been the sort of head of intelligence for all of our global operations. Directed really at Helen and probably Peter. I've seen two Peters, but one of the things that we've discussed at a previous SASIG is sort of reaching the boardroom with meaningful metrics of how you can persuade people the level of risk. And one of the ways that we were able to do that for all our global operations is really look at a whole set of different metrics based on policy and money and various other bits and pieces, and in order to be able to review those to maybe manage our risk, but also to get to our making sure that our boss could really understand what was the most important thing that he was dealing with. So my question really is, Helen, in terms of your narrative, if you like, to central government, which is massively distracted with lots of other things at the present moment, how are we getting the message collectively across that the threats that we face within the cyber domain are absolutely critical, and therefore there is money and effort, collective effort, that needs to be maintained, and this is not just a flash in the pan?
If I understand you right, you're talking about how government is getting that message across to industry.
How you're getting that, or how you, in terms of the Home Office, you're understanding that from all of your partners from across law enforcement and elsewhere, and how you're making ministers understand that, because ministers are, are politicians, and therefore, there's a consistency there that you're trying to make sure that they understand.
So, I think in terms of the Home Office, and those are the ministers I can probably speak for most closely because they're the ones I work with, I absolutely think that they get that message. I think even were it not for the recent attributions of hostile state activity, which is the kind of thing that any Home Secretary is going to take very seriously given our responsibilities for national security, I think the message that cyber crime impacts the economy and impacts government departments and impacts public services and impacts the ordinary citizen as much as it does is absolutely very much taken on board. I've been really struck actually in recent weeks in even the Home Secretary's recent address to staff in the Home Office following... now, this is terribly embarrassing. I can't remember what the address was about. The thing I took away from it was that in talking about... Yeah, isn't that... Shouldn't have started this train of thought, should I?
You recovered marvellously. But what you took away from it was...
What I took away from it was that in talking about what he saw as the big threats facing the Home Office, both the Home Secretary and the Security Minister, without any briefing by me, specifically for this speech, which is a good thing since I clearly didn't really pay very much attention to the central tenet of what they were talking about. But without any briefing by me, what they said in response to staff questions about, what are the key things driving the Home Office, they both front and centre cyber was up there, not just for security reasons from the sort of national security state-to-state point of view, but from the crime impact as well. So I do think that message is taken very seriously in the Home Office. I think government, in terms of protecting government's own systems, increasingly those departments that have large kind of customer bases and online public-facing services are, so the HMRCs and the DWPs of the world are very, very alive to the risks that they face. And it's not my part of the National Cybersecurity Programme. It's one of the parts that's run by the Cabinet Office is investing very heavily now in making sure that each government department knows what they need to do for not only kind of the government security, but the security of those citizens who are accessing their services. Because the last thing we want is for it to be when you're paying your tax that you get cyber attacked. I think that's not a great message to send to the taxpayers of this country, because we want people to pay more tax, if anything, rather than less.